The Idries Shah Foundation podcast. Practical Psychology for Today. Featuring the works of Idries Shah, voiced by David Ault. Welcome to the Idries Shah Foundation podcast. In this edition of the podcast, we will hear selections from Learning How to Learn by Idries Shah. This audio has been made available by the Idries Shah Foundation. Part 2. On Attention. Characteristics of Attention and Observation. Question. Can you define characteristics of attention and observation as of importance in Sufic studies? Answer. Study the attracting, extending and reception, as well as the interchange of attention. One of the keys to human behavior is the attention factor. Anyone can verify that many instances, generally supposed to be important or useful human transactions on any subject, social, commercial and so on, are in fact disguised attention situations. It is contended that if a person does not know what he is doing, in this case that he is basically demanding, extending or exchanging attention, and as a consequence thinks that he is doing something else, contributing to human knowledge, learning, buying, selling, informing and so on, he will A. be more inefficient at both the overt and the covert activity, B. have less capacity of planning his behavior and will make mistakes of emotion and intellect because he considers attention to be other than it is. If this is true, it is most important that individuals realize 1. That this attention factor is operating in virtually all transactions, 2. That the apparent motivation of transactions may be other than it really is, and that it is often generated by the need or desire for attention activity, giving, receiving, exchanging, and 3. That attention activity, like any other demand for food, warmth, and so on, when placed under volitional control, must result in increased scope for the human being who would then not be at the mercy of random sources of attention, or even more confused than usual if things do not pan out as they expect. Certain principles may be enunciated. They include 1. Too much attention can be bad, inefficient. 2. Too little attention can be bad. 3. Attention may be hostile or friendly and still fulfill the appetite for attention. This is confused by the moral aspect. 4. When people need a great deal of attention, they are vulnerable to the message which too often accompanies the exercise of attention towards them. For example, someone wanting attention might be able to get it only from some person or organization, which might thereafter exercise, as its price, an undue influence upon the attention-starved individual's mind. 5. Present beliefs have often been inculcated at a time and under circumstances connected with attention demand, and not arrived at by the method attributed to them. 6. Many paradoxical reversals of opinion or of associates and commitments may be seen as due to the change in a source of attention. 7. People are almost always stimulated by an offer of attention, since most people are frequently attention deprived. This is one reason why new friends or circumstances, for instance, may be preferred to old ones. 8. If people could learn to assuage attention hunger, they would be in a better position than most present cultures allow them to attend to other things. They could extend the effectiveness of their learning capacity. 9. Among the things which unstarved people, in the sense of attention, could investigate is the comparative attraction of ideas, individuals, and so on, apart from their purely attention-supplying function. 10. The desire for attention starts at an early stage of infancy. It is, of course, at that point linked with feeding and protection. This is not to say that this desire has no further nor future development value, but it can be adapted beyond its ordinary adult usage of mere satisfaction. 11. Even a cursory survey of human communities shows that while the random eating tendency, possessiveness, and other undifferentiated characteristics are very early trained or diverted, weaned, the attention factor does not get the same treatment. The consequence is that the adult human being, deprived of any method of handling his desire for attention, continues to be confused by it, as it usually remains primitive throughout life. 12. Very numerous individual observations of human transactions have been made. They show that an interchange between two people always has an attention factor. 13. Observation shows that people's desires for attention ebb and flow. When in an ebb or flow of attention desire, the human being, not realizing that this is his condition, attributes his actions and feelings to other factors, for example, the hostility or pleasantness of others. He may even say that it is a lucky day when his attention needs have been quickly and adequately met. Re-examination of such situations has shown that such experiences are best accounted for by the attention theory. 14. Objections based upon the supposed pleasure of attention being strongest when it is randomly achieved do not stand up when carefully examined. I prefer to be surprised by attention can be paraphrased by saying, I prefer not to know where my next meal is coming from. It simply underlines a primitive stage of feeling and thinking on this subject. 15. Situations which seem different when viewed from an oversimplified perspective, which is the usual one, are seen to be the same by the application of attention theory. For example, people following an authority figure may be exercising the desire for attention or the desire to give it. The interchange between people and their authority figure may be explained by mutual attention behavior. Some gain only attention from this interchange. Some can gain more. 16. Another confusion is caused by the fact that the object of attention may be a person, a cult, an object, an idea, interest, and so on. Because the foci of attention can be so diverse, people in general have not yet identified the common factor, the desire for attention. 17. One of the advantages of this theory is that it allows the human mind to link in a coherent and easily understood way many things which it has always wrongly been taught are very different, not susceptible to comparison, and so on. This incorrect training has, of course, impaired the possible efficiency in functioning of the brain, though only culturally, not permanently. 18. The ability to feel when attention is extended, and also to encourage or to prevent its being called forth, makes man almost uniquely vulnerable to being influenced, especially in having ideas implanted in his brain and being indoctrinated. 19. Raising the emotional pitch is the most primitive method of increasing attention towards the instrument which increased the emotion. It is the prelude to, or accompaniment of, almost every form of indoctrination. 20. Traditional philosophical and other teachings have been used to prescribe exercises in the control and focusing of attention. Their value, however, has been to a great measure lost because the individual exercises, prescribed for people in need of exercise, have been written down and repeated as unique truths and practiced in a manner, with people and at a rate and under circumstances which, by their very randomness, have not been able to effect any change in the attention training. This treatment has, however, produced obsession. It continues to do so. 21. Here and there proverbs and other pieces of literary material indicate that there has been at one time a widespread knowledge of attention on the lines now being described. Deprived, however, of context, these indications survive as fossil indicators rather than being a useful guide to attention exercise for contemporary man. Attention upon oneself or upon a teacher, without the exercise of securing what is being offered from beyond the immediate surroundings, is a sort of short circuit. As Rumi said, "Do not look at me, but take what is in my hand. Part 3. Sufi Study Themes. Question. If you were to give a number of study themes to the people present, which ones would you stress? Answer. 1. All approaches to a study or an individual may start with a desire for attention. However they start, they must never end up in this manner. 2. Study the assumptions behind your actions. Then study the assumptions behind your assumptions. 3. Why did I do such and such a thing is all very well, but what about how otherwise could I have done it? 4. You have come a long way and you do not know it. You have a long way to go and you do not know what that means. 5. In respect to some, you may have advanced. In relation to others, you have not progressed at all. Neither observation is more important than the other. 6. If your desire for good is based on greed, it is not good, but greed. 7. Exercise power by means of kindness, and you may be causing more damage than you could by cruelty. Neither approach is correct. 8. The man who knows must discharge a function. The one who does not cannot arrogate one to himself. He can only try to do so. 9. Do not try to be humble. Learn humility. 10. Assume that you are part hypocrite and part heedless, and you will not be far wrong. 11. To copy a virtue in another is more copying than it is virtue. Try to learn what that virtue is based upon. 12. No practice exists in isolation. 13. If you seek a teacher, try to become a real student. If you want to be a student, try to find a real teacher. 14. The more often you do a thing, the more likely you are to do it again. There is no certainty that you will gain anything else from repetition than a likelihood of further repetition. 15. At first, you are not worthy of the robes and implements of the Sufi. Later, you do not need them. Finally, you may need them for the sake of others. 16. If you cannot laugh frequently and genuinely, you have no soul. 17. When a belief becomes more than an instrument, you are lost. You remain lost until you learn what belief is really for. 18. When a dervish shows interest in your material welfare, you may be pleased, but it is frequently because you are not yet ready for anything else. 19. When someone asks for you to help in doing something, do you imagine that it is because he cannot do it unaided? Perhaps he is a Sufi who wants to help you by connecting you with his task. 20. If you are lazy, count yourself lucky if someone points this out, giving you a chance to improve. Laziness is always your fault. It is the sign that a man has persevered in uselessness for too long. These points are in fact exercises in outwitting the false self, which thrives on smaller satisfactions. The Sufi aims at fana, passing away of the false self, and baqa, remaining of the real. Behind the supposed I, which is impermanent, lies the real one, which is characterized by the awareness of truth, of reality. And listen to the words of Junaid of Baghdad when he said, "A good-natured sensualist is better than a bad-tempered, so-called Sufi." Part 4. Things of the World. An Eastern Sage and the Newspapers. Letter to a Sage. A Western student of the spiritual wrote a fierce and reproving letter to a certain Eastern sage when he saw his name in a newspaper. "You should be completely unconcerned with the things of this world," he said. and much else. When I visited the sage, I asked him what he had thought of the letter, as I wanted to report his reaction to the writer of it. "I do get letters, it is true," he murmured, "but I am afraid I do not read them because, you see, they are things of this world, and I am not concerned with them." Things of this world include, according to the Sufis, anything other than the truth. Conduct of the Sufis. The conduct of the Sufis does not necessarily show their degree of detachment. It more often shows what the observer imagines it to show. Sheikh Yahya Munir, in common with many authorities, states that the behavior of the realized Sufis, the awliya, is not all the same in appearance. Some eat well and sleep, others fast and stay awake at night. Some are clothed in rags, others in excellent clothes. Some accept gifts, others do not. Those who judge others by such appearances are called, by the Sufis, people of externals. Such judgments are made by people whose emotional life has expanded at the expense of their humanity, their logical capacities, and certainly their spiritual perceptions. Taking the name of God. The dilemma of people who only use words and not full understanding for their religious conceptions is well illustrated in this story, the one of the fruit, from Rumi's Fihi ma Fihi. Someone took some fruit from a tree and ate it. The lord of the property said to him, "Why do you do such an unlawful thing? Do you not fear God?" The fruit eater replied, "Why should I? The tree is God's, and I am God's servant, eating from God's tree." The owner said, "Wait, and I will give you your answer." He had the other man tied to the tree and beaten. The man cried out, "Do you not fear God that you do this to me?" The landlord said, "Why should I fear? You are the servant of God, and this stick, which is God's, is being used to strike God's servant." Just as intellectual and systematized religious argument fails when brought into a broader context, so do even wider religious concepts fail when compared with the extra-dimensional perception of truth which the Sufis bring to human experience. That is the message of all the Sufi sages. Basis for people's interest. Someone wants to know how it is that it is difficult to get to see me. He also wants to publicize my spiritual attainments. I'll tell you about both. It is not either easy or difficult. It is more likely to be a matter of figures, just as it would be with anyone. Taking an 8-hour day and 7-day week, we find that in a year, if one sees one person each hour, in daily session and doing nothing else, giving 1-hour interviews, I could see just under 3,000 people a year, and each one only once. But something between 3 and 10 times that number of people express a desire to see me. And if every year you saw each person only twice, you would only be able to see around 1,500 people. Although the subject is always supposed to be important, I note that the urgency drops off, mysteriously, on holidays and during summer vacations. Mind you, if I were doing nothing else but seeing all comers for an hour a day, the procedure would carry the makings of its own solution. This is because I would become so boring, so worn out, so useless, that people would want to see me less and less, and so I would eventually retrieve my freedom. So rather than have to go through this, why should I not carry on and remain at the position where I am anyway? Especially since there are adequate supplies of other people who are delighted to be surrounded by troops and groups of people imbibing their wisdom from morning to night. I have been criticized for saying this. It is said that such people always create dissatisfaction among the majority of their followers, who soon switch to the next guru. Exactly what I mean. If I were to behave in this way, I would also create dissatisfaction, when people had had enough of my ritual of sitting about being the great guru. I have neither the inclination nor the training to enroll myself in the guru circuit. The foregoing, of course, looks upon the seeing people activity as a socio-psychological activity, already adequately observed by sociologists but entirely ignored by the occult-minded, except when they confuse it with a spiritual activity, which it most certainly is not. In my own experience, amply confirming that of the traditional Sufi authors, this clustering around will have to be justified by the clusterers as a spiritual activity. The onus is on them to do so, or else to seek out their natural affinities, the seekers of adulation whose main other characteristic so often seems to be that they cannot bear to be alone for very long. In my youth, a teacher said to me, "If collecting together were the way to greater enlightenment, grains of sand would all have become saints, flocks of birds would break up and each one would become a spiritual teacher, sheep would exercise the functions of the enlightened." Similarly, the characteristic which we see in the least enlightened to crowd around things and people deemed to be strange, valuable, or exciting would not be gatherings of gapers, but rather assemblies of the elect. Sheikh Abu Ishaq's friends. As to spiritual attainments, I am reminded of the words which Sheikh Abu Ishaq of the Green Island, near Algeciras in Spain, spoke to Ibn Arabi and reported in his 12th century Durat al-Fakira. I regard people as of two types. First, there is the friend who has a good opinion of me and speaks well of me. He is a friend. Then there is the person who speaks badly of me, who tells of my spiritual condition. Thinking in terms of supply and demand. Question. If people interested in spiritual things are asking what are in fact commercial questions, is that the fault of the people or of the systems? How does your range of questioners compare with those received by others working in the spiritual field? Answer. This is several questions in one. First, people have been trained to think in crude supply and demand terms about almost everything. This is due to the culture and social outlook, so it is hard to call it the fault of the people or of the systems which they are approaching with questions. Second, if you read published literature by people working in the spiritual field from the supply and demand analysis point of view, you might be amazed to find that in general, neither the questioner nor the spiritual man seems to be aware that they are engaged upon commercial-type transactions. Third, discussions with professional people, such as doctors and lawyers, show that they get the same kind of questions, structurally supply and demand questions, from their clients, and indeed the whole range of annoyances and subjectivities of which I have been speaking. This is so well understood by real teachers in the East that it is summed up in the joke, "So-and-so went to a certain teacher for conversation, but all he got was illumination." Question. Are your books designed, then, to fill in gaps in possible behavior patterns in people approaching Sufism? Answer. On the general level, they all carry this design, and the result of asking interested people to read them carefully has been to establish and maintain successfully a basis of holding a viewpoint which would otherwise need monastic circumstances to reveal and develop. Question. What other activities do you employ, in addition to your books? Answer. An enormous range. But these activities, many of which, though traditional among Sufis, would be unrecognizable as spiritual by narrowly conditioned people, are experienced following the grounding in of the books, and in specific measure prescribed, as it were, for the needs of the people. Thus they are not susceptible to descriptions like listing them or writing about them. Knowledge as action. People who deal with spiritual matters as if they were commercial questions, people who seek behavior patterns as in the second question, the query about activities, are all, I think, due to inquiries based on the desire for action. To the degree to which this is true, We should note what Sheikh Ibrahim Ghazou'i Elahi says about the matter of knowledge and action, how action cannot take place without knowledge. He stresses that people argue about whether knowledge or action should come first, but they are the same. Worthwhile action is in fact knowledge in operation. Right action stems from right knowledge. Right knowledge is acquired through the teacher. An infuriating book. One of the few instances where we can quote the operation of a non-book as an instrument, yet bridge the area of literature, is in the case of the Book of the Book. This tale, which I published in the form of a book, tells how people become disappointed by books, and how they can learn from them what is and is not in them. Critics were furious because the story was so short, as they assumed that a book must be of a certain length. This fury overtook them before they had read the contents, which described their behavior and showed how inadequate it was. This gave us, and many other people as well, published evidence of the mentality of literary people and literal thinkers which they would never have admitted to if directly challenged. We let them do it for us. This shows how a book can be used to create a situation. This podcast is copyright 2018, the Idries Shah Foundation.